All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the School of Theater's panel on race and theater. This is the first in an ongoing series of panel discussions with these distinguished theater artists, all of whom have a connection with the School of Theater. As we progress throughout the year, these panels will address more specific topics. So if you don't have the opportunity to ask all of your questions today, there will be more opportunities in the future. There will be time allotted for questions toward the end. To ask a question, please use the Q&A function at any time. Finally, this session will be recorded and posted. And I'll post the link in the chat for anyone who wants additional information on the speakers and ongoing equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives for the School of Theater. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Greg Williams. Greg is an award-winning director, playwright, educator, and theater consultant, and the founding artistic director of New Venture Theater Company, which presents many of its productions on campus in the Music and Dramatic Arts Building. He has worked across the country launching diversity-based theater companies and across the Baton Rouge region to bring the arts to underserved communities. Welcome, Greg.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our first digital event, Race in the Theater. Before I get started, I want to go ahead and introduce my fellow amazing panelists, and I'm going to let them take 10 quick seconds and just talk about all the brilliance and talents that they possess and what they're doing in the world today. So let's start with Miss Margaret Kemp, if you please. Oh, you are on mute, my dear. There you go.
I am Associate Professor Theater and Dance at UC Davis. I am an actor as well as a theater director and theater maker. I think that's it.
Awesome.
I am committed to culturally sustaining pedagogies in the teaching of theater. Yeah.
Great. And Mr. G.D. Kimball, please.
G.D. Kimball, I am an actor, director, playwright, and dramaturg based in New York. More and more in the last few years, I've been drifting more into educational theater. I'm an LSU graduate, class of 02, and also I recently returned last fall to direct Trouble in Mind on the main stage.
Great. Miss Lori Parkett, am I saying that correct? I want to make sure.
No, not quite, but I'll say it right for you.
I was rehearsing it. I thought I had it. Okay.
My name is Lori Parquet. I'm an actor, director, playwright, teaching artist. I live in Brooklyn, New York, but I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana. And I recently directed Brooklyn Bridge at LSU this past fall.
Great. That set was amazing. I had a chance to see it. Wow. Mr. Orlando Smith.
I attended LSU in the late 90s, early 2000s, and graduated from there in 2003. I'm an actor as well. I also write and have directed, working on a few things right now. Most recently at Swine Palace, I had the pleasure of coming back last year and being in Airline Highway, directed by the inimitable Joy Vandervoort Cobb, to whom I handed over.
Yeah. And Miss Joy, please.
Hi, you guys. I am Joy. I know a lot of you that are here today. I am an actor, director, and until August 15th, I am the Associate Professor of African American Theater and Performance at the College of Charleston. As of August 16th, I'll be an adjunct faculty member at the college. I write and do voiceover work, and Swine Palace is home number 2 for me.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. So we've broken up this topic into several sections. So today, we're really going to discuss what do arts and culture look like when Black Lives Matter. So please, if you have any questions or comments, please type those out on the side, and I'll try to incorporate as many of those as we can as we discuss these topics and move forward. So let's get this thing going. So let's just start with maybe about a month ago now. We had the unfortunate George Floyd murder happen, and shortly about a week after that, every single company, organization across the entire nation had a Black Lives Matter statement placed on the website. in all of their marketing, all of their branding. And I want to ask a question. What took so long? Let's start there. What took so long, and who was creating these statements to start with? So let's just discuss that. It seemed like everybody at the same time, light bulb went off at the same time. So what was that about?
Well, I'll go. Clearly, arts organizations, to be fair, tend to be more hip than other organizations. So even if you look at other companies, and even the theater especially, I think, it came too late, in that it should have been said before, obviously, the killing of George Floyd. But also, I know that behind the scenes, in certain channels, the theaters, that they all talk together, everybody got together. I've been told there are huge talks that had, we gotta say something. What will you say? Certain theaters did it on their own ahead of that like great burst that you were talking about.
Yeah.
But a lot of it, and was covering their butts, frankly. And that's the way things have been. It's unfortunate. I understand a lot of Black artists feel, the question is, what did you take you so long? I mean, I've read a few essays. Tanya Pinkins wrote this searing essay, which you must read. Look up Tanya Pinkins' essay, everyone. But really talking about the state of affairs in the American theater, and how minorities, and Black people in this case, are an afterthought until something hits the fan. That's my take.
Gotcha.
Yeah, Pinkins' article is really important. And there are some other ones that are dropping very soon. I just got to preview one that I found, both heartbreaking and so clearly honest, that it was really painful to read. Tanya's was painful to read for different reasons. And the question always is, what's taken so long? We've been asking for a seat at the table, but not just a seat at the table, because I'd like to also eat, right?
Right.
And performative measures mean naught if everything you've done up until this point has clearly said, yeah, it matters when I'm putting you in my theater for whatever reason, right? My February slot, my October slot, whatever. So yeah, what took so long? And there are so many of us,
yes,
who work in this business who have asked that question without an answer for a very long time. And performative responses are just no longer enough.
Action. We need action.
Right. And I think that, arts organizations are also businesses.
Right.
And so there's that, I think there's that immediate response of, what do we do?
Yeah.
We put the fire out. Immediately, so we need something to put the fire out and sort of buy some time. So I think that was that first burst of like the black screens and the hashtags and all that kind of thing. And then in the days following, I remember, I don't know if this was the case for everybody else, but it seemed like every theater I have ever stepped into in my life was ringing my phone off the hook.
Yeah.
Because they were all scrambling, and they were in the, okay, we did the thing. We put the black screen on Instagram. Now what do we do? And they're at a loss because, and I think that speaks to what took so long is that saying anything up to this point is controversial, and a business needs to not be controversial. And so that speaks to the whole greater issue is that Black audiences, Black artists being seen as the other, being seen as the guests in white space, so that there was no need to say anything at this point because we weren't actually part of the fabric of the day-to-day business of these arts organizations until suddenly, windows had to shatter and things had to catch on fire before everyone realized, oh, wait a minute, maybe we should actually bring this nation full of brown and black skinned people into this conversation for real and actually figure out what to do other than a few hashtags and posting a black screen on Instagram.
Right.
Yeah, the concept of inertia comes up for me when I think about what took so long. There have been other moments in American theater's history where, it's like it's time to highlight some black voices, and that happened. But then that object stays at that level.
Yeah.
Until an outside force says,
Yep.
no more, And
Right.
so that's what took so long, but it also, that same inertia is what has me being like, agreeing with Joy in that the statements aren't enough, the performative measures aren't enough, because that will also lead us to a place of inertia. It's like, that's a dangerous spot, stagnant.
Right.
Yeah. Totally with you. And I think that brings me to my next question. Let's move on to the how, because we have these statements, and I think it's time that we actually hold these statements to some truth. And I didn't create this. This was something I heard once. What do reparations look like when Black Lives Matter in theater? Like, how do we create equity in theater? What are those steps that these theaters have to take to make these statements hold truth?
I mean, I don't know if everyone has,
I would throw that to you all.
everyone has read the document that the We See You White American Theater group collective, I don't even know how they are naming themselves, but
Demands, yes.
there is a 31-page document that is a literal list of demands about how to make theater spaces equitable in the ways that these statements said that they would. And some of them, I love the audacity of the document, because after sitting and reading through 31 pages of it, I said, oh, this is all possible.
Mm-hmm.
It's about, are people going to take the energy and the resources it required to make this happen? And so that document, I think it's been posted in the chat now, had things like just making sure that 50% of your administrative staff is BIPOC, meaning Black, Indigenous, person of color. Any design team on a production, if that production deals with any kind of racialized trauma, that the actors, the BIPOC actors, have professional staff on hand every day in that rehearsal room, that processes begin with reading that company's statement on diversity, equity, and inclusion, the same way that a lot of theater companies that I work for currently, on the first day of rehearsal, will read you their code of conduct, right? And that was a result of the Me Too movement, and like really implementing that we are not standing for sexual harassment in our workplace. And it happened. And so what I love about that document, the We See You White American Theater, is that it kind of has that same audacity in the sense of these reparations can happen if we make it. And this is just what we want it to look like. So what Joy said about bringing people to the table and allowing them to eat.
Yes.
It's really a big way of what that document got at, and like how we can make reparations happen.
Well said.
Parity in the space, making the space welcome to BIPOCs, and not in that tokenized way, but in truth. Also making a Black audience. I had a big discussion about this when I was working with on doing national facilitation with Art Equity, and they talked about, because we see theater as a white space. Let's just be honest, we think of it as a white space that we go into on occasion as workers or as audience members, that it limits BIPOC participation because of the rules attached to it. The look you get because you laughed out loud, too loud, or whatever. That pushes people out of the room. We need to start breaking that stuff down. And I think it was the Goodman that posted something at the theater space, trying to let the audience know you are welcome here. And reparations to me also, along with that doc, and I'm not behind all 31 steps, but they got me for 30 of them, is to find a way to invite an audience of color in and make them comfortable enough to want to come back, and not just for your Black pieces.
Right.
Theater can be transformative for everyone, but if I don't feel like I belong in your space,
Right.
I'm not coming back. And I have to know too, that as a theater institution, you want me there.
Mhm.
And that is through your programming, through your talk back stuff, through the interaction I have with you in the lobby and within the theater.
I think that also,
Well said.
all of that happens because you have BIPOC in positions of power. And that's how you make sure it's okay. You can be well-intentioned and you can try to see everything, but unless you're of that minority group, you won't have, perhaps, very likely, the insight to things which need to be addressed. So as long as BIPOC are not integral in terms of being behind the desk, in terms of casting, in terms of directing the theater, in terms of managing the theater, you will continue to have failures.
Yeah.
So that's what I think the We See You White American Theater is all about. It's simply about approaching a process of, from the ground up, not just for your show, but for your entire organization, fully empowering and integrating people of color.
Right. I directed the Mountaintop Theater in Virginia, and they were astounded at the number of Black audience members that had shown up for that show. They had never had Black people, full stop, in that theater, and suddenly half their audience were Black audience members, and they were astounded. And they said, "Well, how did this happen? Where did they come from?" I said, first thing, if you would ask the audience members, they would all say, well, because they saw this face on the news and in the paper talking about that show. They saw my cast on the news and in the paper talking about that show. And then so the next question was, well, how did this happen? I said, well, that's how it happened. But the more important question you need to ask yourself is how to maintain those audiences. And you do that by reaching out to those audiences. Ask those people, what do you want? What do you need from us? How do we keep this conversation that we've just started going? And I'm all but certain they didn't do that. They sort of let that all walk out, that whole segment of their audience walk out the door with no real plan or want or need to get them back. Because this show was immediately after, there's been so many at this point, Eric Garner. So there was that need to we have to put Black spaces on stage real quick to kind of put the fire out. And then as soon as that died down, it went away. And so there was exactly that thing. There's no substantive change in the structure of that theater to make any kind of changes. It was, again, performative. Pat yourselves on the back. Oh, we did a Black show with a Black director and Black cast. We're great. And then it's like, all right, well, the work is done. End of conversation.
I am going to, the one thing I'd like to offer is that in the spaces I have been in, both as an actor, director, theater maker, there seems to be, among most of the staff, the people who are not of color, absolutely no knowledge of the breadth of African American creativity in theater. I just had somebody look at something that I did and they said, well, why isn't this visual art and not, why do you call it theater? And I thought to myself, have you ever seen For Colored Girls? That has music, that has dance, that has visual art. That is our expressivity. And to not know that coming is unconscionable. So my feeling is that some of these theaters have to humble themselves to what they don't know. And they are going to have to do the effort to do the training that we as people of color have had to do. We've had to study art and theirs. And I think now we have to say we have to find a way to make that conversation together and not siloed.
Yep.
So when I am doing a show and I say, I want one of the main set pieces is doors, and somebody says, why doors? Doors are doors. No, doors are public and private. One of the conversations I want to bring in here is the idea about surveillance. And if you don't know that, I don't want to spend a whole production meeting explaining to you how surveillance impacts this narrative. So there has to be something that, yes, somebody wrote, read more Black plays and playwrights, but what about also reading, the works of Audre Lorde? Because again, it is inclusive. What about reading W.E.B. Du Bois? It is inclusive. It is not just the playwrights.
We get this, I think, Margaret, I love you. We get this.
And I'm like, oh, yes.
So often, and certainly as an educator, I'd gotten it a number of times from a number of different places. We're going to leave that there because we try not to have any bitter pills this morning. But the idea that I have spent my entire life knowing you, and by you, I mean white people. Because in order to move through this world with any safety, a modicum of safety, or any forward movement, I have to know you. I'm taught about you from kindergarten all the way through college. My training was all about the Eurocentric view of who I am, which is not actually who I am.
Right.
And it is debilitating in so many ways. And I'm always shocked and appalled that you don't know more. Not just about me as an actor or a director or a playwright, because reading plays, as Margaret said, not enough. Know this journey as much as you can from reading a book or watching a video, because there are 3 trillion out there. If you're really invested in making a sustainable and parity-filled change, you can't do that without knowing whom you're dealing with. And only dealing with Black pain is not okay, because guess what? There is Black joy.
Thank you.
And there is Black love. Look at this space, and Black creativity. And we come at it in a different way, holding it in a different form. If we're coming from our cultural perspective, and we're not a monolith, so it's all going to be very, very different. But you have to make room. I did oh my God, it's 100 years old, but I only did it like 6-7 years ago, long time since yesterday, because I was looking for a piece where I could use African-American women for my program. And it's all women. P.J. Gibson, old play. And deals with LGBTQ, deals with that hierarchy we play within our race, right? Who's good, who's not good?
Yes.
Who's valid, whose voice is valid, etc. Well, I had, well, as always, an all-white design team. And when my set designer, whom I adore, I looked at what he was bringing me and I said, this has nothing to do with the African-American experience. And this woman, if she is nothing else, the lines tell us that she was vested in this community. So you have to open up to looking at images outside of what you know. And he's been teaching that ever since, because there is a different way to experience our lives than what you think, because you don't know enough about us, because that has not been the push. And I'm saying, if you want to live successfully with us, that should be the push. I need to know you.
Yes.
Sorry.
No, thank you for saying our Black joy and not only noticing our Black pain, because that has been something that I've noticed is a huge problem in white theaters, that they don't recognize our fullness. And actually, that kind of leads me to my next point. Let's talk about decolonizing and how Black bodies are presented on stages in white theaters, and how do they view us? Is it a resource? Hey, we need a Black person, or are we able, you know, there was colorblind casting 10 years ago, which was a huge failure. But how do we move towards really understanding the fullness of a Black actor in your piece? And how do we open up for that and have those discussions? Because you've got to bring your fullness of who you are. I can't be a white Cinderella. I'm a Black Cinderella with the wig because I'm bald. Let's go there.
My connection is not unstable. Sorry.
Well, I feel like I've been negotiating that question my entire life. And I'm going to be honest, I don't know if there's I can give you my perspective shifts from project to project, year to year, because I only know what I've experienced. And in terms of coming up, I think in LSU, since that's what we're here to talk about today, a large part of my casting, apart from Fences, was not race specific. At the time, I didn't necessarily need it to be. I didn't need it to be. What people saw and what they perceived out of what I did, where I currently am, that's on you. I present this way. Indefatigably, I'm a Black man. It's not up for discussion. But how you run with that audience, artistic director, design team, that's on you. What I bring to the party is all the things that I am, and what you perceive is your business. Now, what the story tells, it's my job to bring that to life. And as Joy said, if it's a Black story or if it's not a Black story, I have a wealth to draw upon, and that can be of value. So that's kind of today where I land. You might hear something different from me, but what I think that says is that it's an ongoing discussion. And the reason why colorblind casting came out, let's talk about it, I think it's because Black faces weren't even there, right? So this is a play that well, I'm jumping back a little bit. I was in high school at Baton Rouge High, and I was in a project with my theater department going to a plantation where I was the master. My daughter was a white girl. And that's just the way it was. Because we were telling about this story.
Right.
Now, there's a ton of things, looking back on it, which probably get a lot of attention. But from a formative mind, it became impressed upon me at 17 in Baton Rouge at a plantation where potentially ancestors were, that I can play someone who is not at all my historic background. And whether I did it honestly or truthfully is not the point, but that is the freedom I was given. Joy has called me a unicorn in that way, because not everybody else is given that opportunity. So I think that's
what everybody on this panel is a unicorn.
Yes.
I call you all unicorns.
So I think giving artists, Black, otherwise, opportunities to explore, and the limitations that white institutions put on Black people is the real question, right? And we deserve the freedom to tell our stories the way we want to tell them, with our authenticity, and the freedom to tell other kinds of stories. That's how Black bodies live in the space. It's a given. I don't perform my Blackness for you. I'm just doing it today. I'm just me, So the rest of that is this magic dialogue that comes between what we perceive, and that dialogue, as I said, is ever changing.
Yeah, when I started directing, I learned for myself that in order to have a rehearsal process where people are able to be their fullest selves, it means that I have to start this process off acknowledging everyone as a whole person. And I just recently had a rehearsal process where I was an actor, and it was like a salon style thing over Zoom where these were strangers, writers wrote pages, directors said I'll direct, and actors were gonna act. And so I was sent to one of these breakout rooms in Zoom with people I'd never met before. And the play that I was a part of was, you know, a Black Lives Matter play where this woman was talking about how her house was so unclean. It's been unclean for 400 years, all that stuff. And we had a white director. And so we get put into this breakout room, and I did not know the man's name. I didn't know my scene partner's name. He immediately went to, so let's start at the top. I read this and I thought, and I know as a white man, I shouldn't be the one directing this, but I do know music. So I do know the lyrical nature of this language. So I just want to jump right in. And I literally had to be that actor and be like, I'm sorry, I need to pause because I don't even know the humans that are in this breakout room with me. And for me to do this work, where I'm speaking about a truth that is lived for me, I'm gonna need to know who I'm in the room with, just even if it's a surface human level, just to say that we have taken a breath together and that we're going to step into this alchemical thing that theater is. It's not just, you know, it's not just visual art. It affects us on a cellular level, on a neurological level. And so, you know, and I saw in his face, you know, because we only had 45 minutes to rehearse this thing before we went back to the main Zoom. And I saw on his face that he didn't want to have to go there. He didn't want to take time to just see the people in this breakout room as humans, just have us talk a little bit about ourselves, what we're dealing with, where we're coming from, what we're holding today in this moment. But I'm thankful that I did, because my scene partners in the private chat were chatting me, being like, I'm so glad you know, we didn't get like, and I just had to, and I was thankful that when I became a director that I was like, oh, I can't begin to do the work if I don't even know who's in the room with me. And we have all the process to learn that, but if I don't set the tone to say, I see you as people, not just employees here to do the job, because this job is unlike other jobs, you know, for me at least. And so thinking about Black bodies on stage and how we handle them, how do we see ourselves as all the three-dimensional beings that we are? Like I just take it back to like day one of any process. And it's like, if you're not willing to know who's here with you, if you don't make space for that, you're not actually making space for me to show up as my whole self. So a lot of times I get told I waste a lot of time around the table, but I'm like, how can it be wasted? How is it wasted if people are able to share of themselves beyond the work? Because that's all that's going to make this even all the more rich, the things that we make together once we do get on our feet and take this text to life and all that stuff. But so for me, when I work in these institutions and these universities, from the moment you meet me, I just need you to be more curious. And that, because one, that removes the onus from the BIPOC actor to have to say, well, here I am, this is who I am, as the director, or as the producer, or as the whomever who's brought these people together. How can I be more curious about who I'm sharing space with before we even crack the script open? That's what I've found valuable in my processes.
Nice. I love that, being more curious. That's perfectly said. So let's actually talk about LSU as a whole. Like my organization, we're kind of in and out, so I don't always get to know the depths of everything. But how has the experience been for you all, as far as, do you feel that LSU is actively really trying to open their eyes and allow their statements to hold truth that they say about Black Lives Matter and open these spaces? I mean, this panel here is a great stepping stone, but as far as education and opportunity, what do you all think they could do better, and that they are doing well currently in the LSU theater department?
Well, when I was when I was there last fall for Trouble in Mind, I was struck at the number of students of color kind of in every corner of the department. I mean, there were students of color on design teams. I had students of color, there were students of color everywhere, not just on stage. And I thought that was great. But I think that's a huge thing of getting students of color into design, into dramaturgy, especially. And I thought that was so, it's kind of stopped me in my tracks at first. And because, obviously there's work to be done, but just the fact that LSU was able to assemble this group of people today is an amazing thing, because most of the places I've been and worked, they couldn't do that. Yeah. When they called upon someone to ask them what to do, they called upon me, full stop. So just the fact that the department has people around, has Black and brown bodies around, is a huge thing. It has facilitated an environment where that can be possible. And I think the answer is to just keep talking to those students, because at the end of the day, LSU is, it's in service to the students, and that's it. Like, at the end of the day, my wants and needs from LSU don't matter anymore. It's what's being done for these young people that are coming through, preparing to go in the real world. So I think a real investment in talking to those students and saying, what's working for you? What do you need? Like, I'd like to have, as we move forward with this panel, I'd like to see much more student conversation going on. I want to talk to students of color, hear from students of color, have them be part of this back and forth. I think that's the main thing. And it's such a simple idea of just ask questions and listen. That's it.
And I love that you said dramaturgy, because that is one of the biggest issues that I have working in other theaters, and making sure that those resources are available. So thank you for saying that. Anyone else?
I was struck, I'll be honest, I was struck when I got to LSU that the director in the season, that the director of the show before me was Black and the director of the show after me was Black.
Yep.
And I was like, what? But then I was like, I shouldn't pat them on the back for that, because how many times have there been 3 white directors in a row? Like, it should not be that it was 3 Black directors in a row, but it is, so I will give that to that, because it did. I was happy to see that, I was happy to know that I wasn't the token Black. Now, it might have been 3 token Blacks, but 3, I guess, is better than 1. I don't know, but like, it was of note. And so I had to check myself. I just remember checking myself, being like, well, that there are 3 white directors all the time, So I'm like, I'm glad they're doing that, but it just means that they can even do more, because what I didn't see, like, as we talked about before, was that there was that same level of diversity amongst the faculty and amongst the administration. Yeah.
And I will say that I did wonder when I arrived, and I did see that it was a very diverse season with Black directors and Black writers. And my first thought was, oh, this is really great. And my next thought was, I wonder what happened. I wonder why, like, what did they need? Why did they need a very Black season? Like, what was the thing? Like, what memo came down from somewhere that made everybody panic and program this very Black season? And then I was like, well, that's a shitty thing to think. But it's also, not unreasonable to think it. And I think that just speaks to what Lori's saying about, the previous 400 seasons have been, a valley of white people. So, like, all of a sudden, like, what was so different about this one?
Well, I also want to give much love to Femi Yuba for being the anchor and example for being Black at LSU in the theater. When I was there, he was it. And, I'm quickly racing through my brain about other directors, Black, and GD, you and I were there at the same time.
Yep.
You and I were, apart from Tony Molina, rest in peace.
May you rest in peace.
The only Black men on that stage. There was maybe some guests, but regularly, and there's certainly other MFA students, and I noticed the diversity increase, actually, the MFA students while we were there. So that's, I think, where LSU was. So that said, I agree. When I came and did a show last year, I was shocked at the amount of students of color at every aspect of the school. It was so unfamiliar for me. And I remember talking with some people and I was just like, can't stop smiling. I'm just so excited. And actually, I will say this, I think LSU in general is way different than it was when I was a student there in that regard. That said, and I brought this up before when we were talking amongst ourselves, LSU abuts a predominantly Black neighborhood. And as many universities do in this country that are large wealth concentrations, those neighborhoods are generally poor and have no connection to the university adjacent to it. So today, as we specifically talk about Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge, my hope for the future is that greater integration comes with that community because it's right on your doorstep. And start working with members of that community to tell stories that are endemic to that community, because there's many amazing stories to be found there.
And that is that thing I was talking about earlier, babies, is that until you invite me in, I'm out, right? My experience at LSU has been amazing. And I've been there since 2005, a number of times. Certainly, I've seen it change over time, both in what is being offered, the pieces that are being offered, and the students who are coming. And I mean, Airline Highway was filled with BIPOC, right? But what people don't know is so was oil. And just because you identify someone as white or assume they're white passing doesn't mean that that's their identity. It's what you were talking about, Lori. You sort of have to open up in the room to say, who are you people? But also the actors have to learn, and I think this has to be taught, that you have the agency to be there and to do that. Do you know what I mean? It's not just incumbent upon me to, I have insatiable curiosity, and it could be just because I'm nosy. Because I want to know who I'm in the space with. I want to know who I'm working with. I want to find out things about you, and I want to see how I can use it to work for the character or whatever. But so LSU for me has been, a really positive experience. I've worked with undergrads and graduate students there. Would I like to see more graduate students of color? Yeah, I'd like to see some African-American women in the MFA program, right? I'd love to see some Asian women in the program. But I've certainly had a host of I had a African-American sister as my, God bless Nina, as my assistant director on Airline Highway. It was amazing. And we all thought, oh, this shyness, she's not really there. Sister is all there. And also my dramaturg was African-American, who identifies as an actor first, but a phenomenal mind and just forward movement all the time. And so you open up those spaces to those students and they will come through.
Yeah.
They will come through, but they have to know that it's possible. You know what I mean?
And that it's for them also. Yes, absolutely.
It's for them also. And for more than just being cast, because we don't talk about color blind casting anymore, which is insulting. Don't be blind to this. My color is my joy, not my burden. Okay? So color conscious casting, but you are not color consciously casting if you are not allowing that person, particularly BIPOC person, to be all that they are in that character. We're trained to put all of that stuff aside. All of it, to not have any cultural, only for your Black shows can you be Black. No, I carry this with me in all ways, always.
Wow.
And I need to know that it's safe to do so in these spaces. And it happens in our training. It happens in our training. It's so important for faculty to recognize who is in the room and how language and attitude toward what is most intrinsically true about that person can be diminished by the things that you present them with, by the way you try to change their presentation. And I'm not just talking language, right? Because I want us all to go for a voice that is very clear and clean and all that. But you'll find when you get out, just like my black ass did, that they weren't casting me as Mrs. Potts anymore.
Yeah.
They weren't even letting me in the room for that. Now, this was the 70s, so I'm old, y'all. But all the things that I've been, they're like, Joy, can you soften the language? And it's just like, be more black is what I'm asking you to do, which I don't ever want to hear again. But I understood that the thing that grew my BFA program to me is the same thing they trained out of me.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to
please, Margaret,
say one thing. I'm very interested to know how curriculum can be influenced, because most of the faculty and teachers are, nope, I'm in charge of my classroom. I just do what I do. But I'm feeling it's not enough. I mean, somebody wrote in the chat that why isn't Adrienne Kennedy and August Wilson, why aren't they not included for all students to, and we talked about this on the first day, because we have to make room for those voices in the training program, so that when the people come out and they become the casting directors or they become the directors, they're not already coming from the mindset that that's different stuff and it doesn't belong in the main place. We need to figure out, I mean, I do it because I don't care, but it needs to be not the exception, but the expectation. And how does that happen? That is a huge, huge question. And I feel like that needs to happen.
Absolutely. I love that. And talking about audiences, just, I know when New Venture, we did our first show, we had crowns at LSU, and I was amazed. The technical crew was just surprised because they've never had like an all Black audience before. And they couldn't process the amount of applause, call and response, sometimes standing up. And I had to have a moment where I gathered them and I said, this is what Black people, like, this is our fullness when we come to see a show. We embrace it and we react to it, and that's okay. And I think you've got to be able to, I remember I took a group of young kids to see their first musical. I took them to see Mary Poppins, and doing Feed the Birds, one of them just started singing in the audience because they were enjoying it so much, and like, Feed the Birds, and someone shh, and I was like, but you got to understand, like, this is how we respond to that joy. And you got to understand that when you invite these audiences in, I love it. I think any actor can say, being on stage, you love it when you got an audience that's hooping, hollering, and standing up and applauding you. And so making space for audiences and knowing that that's who they are and that's how they respond, and it's okay. It's still theater.
Yeah.
It's still theater. It's still the experience.
That's that cultural competency we were talking about, right? Because it's also knowing that shushing is not just telling someone to be quiet when it comes to a Black person. You are now policing Black expression, Black creativity, Black all of that, you know? So like, there's a level of consciousness that the shusher must understand and just what that action is in the context of theater and Black people in theater.
Right.
Black people anywhere, don't shush me anywhere.
Don't do it.
You done made yourself unsafe here. And I just put in the chat that it's cultural humility versus competency, because there ain't no test to test whether you are competent culturally. So just a change of phrase. And Margaret asked that question of how do we get the faculty to change? First of all, there has to be a desire to change and an understanding of the import of that change, what that change does for your students. And if you're teaching, you should be vibing for your students, right? And I believe there are all kinds of ways to make that happen. And as a faculty member, don't give me another effing meeting. But if you don't know, then you need another meeting, right? And I'm here to help you with that. I ain't doing all the work, but if there's a real care, I don't want you in my classroom policing me either, right? Oh, for God's sake, don't film it. But or even my rehearsal process, so y'all shut up. I want you to want to know more about how to handle yourself in the classroom and check your own bias. And I think it's real simple to do. And I think more universities and theater programs better get on top of it before we're all gone. We only got 8 minutes, Gregory, and there are 4 questions.
Yeah, I was about to say, I'm a big person on time. So I want, if you all could just drop some final thoughts, some final wisdom. Of course, we have a lot more topics to talk, so this is not the end of our discussions. But final thoughts, everyone.
I'm just going to touch on one of the questions I saw in terms of what do we look for with educational programs that let us know we want to work with them. And I think that for me, it's the same answer for any theater, any arts organization. For my money, the arts is about the future. It's always about looking toward the future. Though the work may seem to celebrate the past or examine the present, what art is always doing is it's forward thinking. And so it's presenting ideas about the kind of world you want to live in. And you demonstrate that by the way you treat the participants in it and the inclusion of them. And so that's what I always look for. Who's there? How do you treat them? And what do you want to do tomorrow? How do you want to tell stories? What stories do you want to tell? What is the kind of art you're looking to make? Because that speaks on how you want to build a world in front of you.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
I mean, for myself, I'm going to be thinking about how do I fight my own inertia? And I encourage these institutions and universities to think about that as well. Like, how can it not require this outside force or energy to take action? How can the onus not be on the BIPOC students, faculty, people, society to make the change? How can white American theater address its own complacency and its own inertia? That's what I'm thinking about.
I'll just say to drop my, make sure that this is not just of the moment, that this really is an investment into changing the future and making sure that all of these actions, and jump in the fight, like really make yourself present. That's my biggest thing. Anyone else before we wrap up for this session? Cool.
I can always go with more language. I think it's, GD, what you said is lovely. What do you want to see in the future? But that's a commitment. And that means you have to know who you are too. And you can't depend on undergraduate BIPOC students because you are in this position of control that can keep them from being cast or used as designers or what have you, wherever their world is. So I've been dealing with a lot of Zooms with alums, and there's so much guilt, which causes me so much pain because between 18 and 23, 24, for some of us 27, your undergraduate years, you don't have the capacity to use the activism language to make the change without being afraid of losing positionality. We have to find a way to honor those needs, and some of that really, really is only possible by looking within. Take that implicit bias test. You might surprise yourself, right? Take the test, see what it says, and then see where you need or where you desire to make a change, because some people will not shiv two gets and no change is coming, that they're comfortable in the position of power that they're in. And I don't need to invite you or put you at my table, and I sure as shit ain't gonna feed you. So we recognize that exists in our community, in the theater. That exists at the university level, right? So some of that reticence to make a change as a professor, it takes a lot of time, Lord knows. It takes a lot of research. People don't, I got this to do, I can't do that. But if you care about those people that you are teaching, those people that you are training, then you must find a way to do it. If you can binge Orange is the New Black, hot damn, then you can figure out where your implicit bias impacts your classroom, impacts your theater production experience, because it is so significant. You cannot choke these students because they don't have the place to say to you, F you, that's wrong, that hurt, and now I am not safe nor brave. And it is our job as faculty members, as administrators, that we make and create a brave and safe space. But you can't do that, Ish, if you don't know who you are and where you stand in this particular conversation. Oops.
No, not oops. I'm just wondering if it's useful to think about, as you have the ombudsperson for faculty, maybe there's something like that that would be useful to make available to students. So at least they have a place to have these conversations rather than going to the therapist after they graduate, where they do feel safe. Because this is what happens. The thing happens in the rehearsal hall, and the student just kind of like puts it down so they can get ulcer or cancer from that. And because they're afraid. They want to be cast, but they're afraid of pushing back. But how are we ever going to be able to address those activities in the rehearsal hall and the classroom if we don't know about them? And I'm going to go further to say, I do a lot of crazy stuff at school I teach. And you know why? Quite honestly, because I'm tenured. I have friends who aren't, and they're like, boy, I wish I could do that. And I know that they can't because they are afraid. They need to eat. They need to pay the rent. But so somebody said more Black faculty. No, you need, yes, that would be great. Yep. But you need more Black faculty who can say, you know what, this is wrong. You know what, don't come into my rehearsal for The Bluest Eye and tell Pecola, this is your Hamlet moment. It's not. Let's find a new language to talk about the big moments, right? But I can do that. So it's not just we're gonna have to, this is a tough one.
It is a tough one.
I feel that can be done, but you need unflinching tenacity.
And there's no point in bringing on a bunch of BIPOC faculty if there's no place to support them.
Right.
Because they too will feel isolated and unsure. And until you have tenure, you walk a little more carefully. Yeah. If this is really something that you want to do. I didn't know. I didn't do any careful walks because I didn't know I was supposed to. Because I kept saying, oh, it's just a part-time job for me, 25 years later. So it comes from a lot of places. The support has to be there. And Margaret, I think the idea that we talked about before about building affinity spaces for these BIPOC, they need a place to work it out so they don't become ill.
Let me pause you because that's a whole section that we're going to talk about for our next topic that we meet. All about it. No, you let us in perfectly. Okay, we are at time, and I just want to thank you all. This has been really wonderful. So thank you all for just sharing. Thank you to LSU Theater Department for creating this platform and for all of you joining and for just making sure that we're pushing this thing forward together. So if you have any questions, please reach out. If there's topics that you want to see us discuss as a group, please let LSU know, and I will make sure that we work those in, because this is for you. Please be safe out there. Take care of one another. Wear your mask when you go out.
Wear a damn mask. Jesus. Oh my God.
And I will leave you with this. Please, just peace, love, and swag, everybody. Take care. Love you all. Thank you.
Thank you,
Be well,
everybody.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.